Hi.
Hi.
All right, Mr. Hilbert, you want to get us started, or?
Okay. Well, I wrote an intro just in case anybody, stumbles across this online, and although since we only have one person in the audience here, but we have a good class there. So.
Right. Hi, person.
So.
That's Edward Snowden on the Hangout there. I'm sure.
Right.
That's the one person, Edward Snowden. It is his preferred mechanism for communicating with the outside world, after all.
So I'm going to say, Cory Doctorow is a blogger, journalist, activist, and science fiction author. His young adult books cover topics as diverse as economic theory, labor history, political science, philosophy, human rights, and proper food safety practices. He has been a delegate to the United Nations for the World Intellectual Property Organization. He co-founded the open-source peer-to-peer software company OpenCola, Inc., and his book Little Brother was on the National Security Agency's suggested reading list for newly hired employees. He was also named one of Forbes magazine's web celebrities from 2007 through 2010. And finally, he was mentioned in Ernest Cline's book Ready Player One, along with Frank Zappa, Rush, and Miss Pac-Man, and many other heroes of my youth. So there you go. There's my intro.
Yeah, that is very good company to be in Ernie's book, it must be said.
So anyway, we'll go ahead and kick you over to Mr. Cusack, and I'll mute it here, and he has some questions for you.
All right, Mr. Doctorow, thank you for joining us. I'm Bradley Cusack. I teach 10th grade English at Santa Fe South High School. And the people on my left and right are some of the wonderful students that we have here, and we've got a couple of questions for you. So I figured I'd kick us off. I'll tell you a little bit about what we did yesterday. We focused a little bit on the leaks for Project Prism and the Edward Snowden controversy over the last year yesterday. So the kids have a couple of questions, and one thought that all of us are still tangling with a little bit, some of the kids, their first experience with the topic, is what do you think about Edward Snowden? Is what he did a good thing or a bad thing? What do you see in the information on Project Prism and the NSA and CIA surveillance?
So to me, it seems pretty clear that what Snowden did was not only justified but necessary, and that he did so at enormous personal risk and at enormous personal cost, and that people who characterize what he did as an act of espionage are not serious. It's usually when I hear people saying that what he did was to betray his country, it's people who didn't sort of figuratively betray their country by telling its secrets, but literally betrayed their country by taking an oath to uphold its constitution and then breaking that oath, spying on Americans, engaging in warrantless surveillance, breaking international law, violating people's human rights routinely, lying to Congress. All of these things are pretty clearly, to me, what we mean when we say betrayal of your country. Violating the rule about state secrecy in the process of revealing enormous, pervasive, multi-billion-dollar, far-reaching surveillance and criminality, to me, that's a much lesser kind of betrayal. That's it's like breaking your promise to keep your friend's secret when your friend's secret is that she has a gun or that he's planning on killing himself or whatever. Those are the kinds of oaths that you're allowed to break in the service of a much more important oath, which is integrity and matters of life and death. And I really feel like this kind of whistleblowing is far too far and far between, because it's pretty clear that the NSA surveillance program was not something that started the year Edward Snowden got his job, that it had been going on for most of a decade, if not longer. And he was really the first whistleblower from inside the spook house to come out and talk about it. There have been plenty of outside whistleblowers. There had been the AT&T linesman Mark Klein in 2005 who blew the whistle on mass surveillance through AT&T's network. And there had been other NSA whistleblowers, Binney and Drake notably, but they didn't take documents with them. They although their lives were destroyed by the NSA as punishment for speaking out, they didn't have the same threat of imprisonment. You know, the press, the Washington Post, quoted an unnamed NSA agent who described how he and his colleagues had lengthy, violent fantasies about sneaking into Russia and murdering Edward Snowden in the most graphic way possible. I don't think that's things that Drake and Binney had to contend with, and I have enormous respect for them, but I think what Snowden did was really without precedent. And the fact that it took 12 years for Snowden to come forward is really an indictment of how much groupthink there is in the surveillance industry, and how closely knit their code of silence is when it comes to pointing out things that are just obviously wrong, obviously not what the Constitution intends, obviously not proportional, and obviously not lawful.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I'm going to turn the next question over to one of my students. We've got a variety of questions, all ranging on the topic of internet privacy and personal security. So I'm going to turn it over to Caesar.
Okay.
Our end after he asks his question.
Hi.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm very well. I can hear you even through all the oceans and land that separate us. You may speak.
My question was, what inspired you to cover this topic?
You mean privacy?
Yeah.
Or surveillance, or all of that stuff? Well, I guess I have wrestled with the question of whether technology is good or bad for all of my life, because it's really obvious to me that technology is enjoyable. And like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but like, you sit down at a new kind of technology, or you get a new gadget and you start using it, and it's awesome. The game is fun. The phone lets you talk to people you couldn't talk to before. The program lets you do things you couldn't do before. There's some website that lets you interact with the world in a way you never anticipated. And so it's really clear to me that it's fun. But what I've always wrestled with is whether it's good or bad, because there's lots of things that are fun that aren't necessarily good. I mean, going really fast in a car while you're drunk is probably very fun. It just may not be very good. And so what became increasingly apparent to me is the question of whether technology is good or bad is not the right question to ask. Because you could see looking around that technology could do enormous good and enormous harm, right? The internet has allowed people to form support networks that help people who are depressed, or people who have economic problems, or people who are separated by their families by thousands of miles, or people whose jobs suck and who want to organize against their bosses. It's allowed them to talk to each other and organize in ways we've never seen before. At the same time, it allows like hate groups to organize. It allows for the most horrific kind of bullying, for child pornography, for surveillance on a scale that like makes every deranged dictator of the last 100 years look like total amateurs without any imagination. You know what supposedly democratic leaders are able to do today. It makes like the weirdest fantasies of Joseph Stalin look like happy daydreams by comparison. And the right question to ask is technology good or bad? Because the answer is pretty clearly that it's either one of those, depending. And so the right question to ask is, what does it depend on? What can we do to make technology good, or to stop it from being bad? What can we do to make it something that helps us hook up with the people around us in a way that makes us stronger and not in a way that makes us more oppressed or liable to oppression, that makes us more deprived or liable to deprivation, that makes us more unhappy? And that's the question that I'm really interested in. And so what Little Brother is supposed to be is not just a book about how the technology works, but how you can use it to make technology good. How you can add the privacy by default, without which it would never have been possible to engage in mass surveillance. How you can think critically of social media, not because all the boring grown-up reasons that you get, although some of them are moderately good, about your future employers looking at Facebook and seeing you doing beer kegs and some awful party when you're 16 years old, but also because the fact that we've all settled on Facebook as like the default way to get around means that if you're driving through the backcountry in Syria, you are likely to be stopped by a militia of one side or the other and forced to log into Facebook so they can look at who your friends are to decide what side you're on and decide whether to shoot you in the head on the spot. Right? That's because we've plumped for a social network that by default makes you, giving you a private space in which you and your friends can conduct your social business. We want to socialize. We should socialize. And you can conceive of a Facebook that lets you socialize without turning you into an ambulatory wallet to be strip-mined of all of the precious, personal material of your life for the service of showing you an ad that's probably not for something you even give a shit about.
There we go. All right, thanks, sir. Next person up is going to be Alberto.
My name is Alberto Alonso, and my question is, could an intelligence organization retrieve information that has been deleted?
I need you to ask that again and louder because I can't hear you.
Could an intelligence organization retrieve information that has been deleted?
Could an intelligence organization something?
Retrieve information that has been deleted from like your computer or off of the internet.
Yes, in both cases, certainly. I mean, so by default, when you delete a file from your hard drive, what your hard drive does is instead of going to that file and writing zeros over all of the sectors that it used to live in, all it does is say, these sectors are now available. So the next time you ask for some space to write a file into, your computer goes, oh yeah, this sector's free. So depending on how long it's been since you deleted the file is almost certainly still there. It just doesn't have the catalog information that tells your computer not to clobber it the next time it writes a file. And so yeah, there's lots of ways to retrieve a file. The other thing is that with very sensitive equipment, every time you write to a drive, which means that you're changing it from a 0 to a 1 or from a 1 to a 0, you leave a trace of what it used to be. And so with a really, really sensitive piece of equipment, you can read not just what state it's in now, whether it's a 1 or a 0, but whether it was a 1 or a 0 the last time it was written to, and the time before that, and the time before that. So like peeling off the layers of an onion, or looking at the pencil marks on a paper after the pencil itself, the graphite's been erased, but you can see the grooves that it was left. You can read old files off of hard drives, and certainly government agencies have had that power for a long time, as do labs and so on. If you ever delete a file that's really, really important, and you've got a couple of $1 million to spend, you can go and hire file recovery specialists who will go and find files, even if they've been deleted and overwritten 4 or 5 times. They can sometimes recover some or all of that file. About files that have been deleted off the internet, so first of all, you have to realize that like the internet is made up of computers with hard drives, right? All of those servers are computers with hard drives. When a file is deleted from one of those servers, it's just like your own computer. It's not really deleted. It's just the catalog information is removed. So in theory, someone could go to that server, pull out its hard drive, and recover your file off of it. There's also a very strong possibility, depending on what you're using, that it was backed up and that it was also intercepted. So the NSA and its partners in the other Five Eyes countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom, has been capturing a really large slice of all of the traffic on the internet. And so it may be that they don't need to recover it after you've deleted it. It may just be sitting there already on a server from having been captured from you. And then finally, if a file's on the internet on somewhere like Facebook, there's a reasonable chance that someone else out there took a screen grab of it or saved it to the disk. And so even though you've deleted it, you shared it with 1 million people first, and they're not going to delete their copies. So it is hard to delete stuff.
Wait. All right, I had to unmute it.
Or I have one more question. What websites still have privacy?
What websites have privacy? So that's a really good question. And it depends on kind of on what you mean by privacy as well. So privacy is not, privacy only exists in relationship to other people. So I can't be private generically. I can only be private, say, from you, right? If you don't know what I'm doing, then what I'm doing is private in relation to you, even if there's someone else in the room who can see me doing it and it's not private related to them. Private's not secret. It's different, right? Like It's not a secret what you do when you go into the toilet, but it's still private. Like, we all know what you do, but you still close the door, right? So, you know, I know what your parents did to make you, right? But most people choose not to let everyone else see them, even though, you know, fundamentally it's the same thing no matter who's doing it. It's still private, even though it's in no way a secret. So to be private means really that only the people that you choose get to know your business. That's what private means. It doesn't mean nobody knows your business, right? I can have a private conversation with my wife. It's not secret because she knows it, right? It's not secret because more than one person knows it. It's still private because only the person I chose to tell about it knows it. So there are lots of tools that try to help you talk to the people that you want to talk to and not to other people. Like, there's a tool called OTR, which stands for off the record. And it's a chat tool like you know, Instant Messenger or like Facebook Messenger or like Yahoo Messenger or whatever, but it's designed so that only you and the person you're talking to will ever be able to read it unless you decide or that other person decides to share it. So not the people who made the software, not a government agency who seizes your computer, not someone who's snooping and listening in on your network. None of those people will ever be able to read your conversation unless you choose to share it with them. Now, the reason you might choose to share it with them is they might threaten to shoot you or arrest you or whatever if you don't share it with them. But at least it's private in the sense that, like, only the people that you know about it, and you have some control over who gets to know about it. There are other tools that are like a lot less private, moderately to a lot less private. Every mobile device is totally non-private by design, right? So your phone is it's basically a tracking ankle cuff like they give to prisoners, except you can make phone calls and play Angry Birds on it. It transmits your location to everybody, right? The phone company, people who are nearby to you, people who have really low-cost devices called stingrays that allow them to gather the data about everyone who's around them, and so on. And then in addition to that, it also stores and can be tricked into transmitting the name of all the Wi-Fi networks you've ever connected to. And there are huge databases of all the Wi-Fi networks in the world and where they are. So, like, for example, a friend of mine emailed me yesterday. She teaches at NYU in New York, and she got an email from one of her students saying, hey, I did this thing where I forced your computer to barf up the list of all the Wi-Fi networks that it ever found, and I saw that it connected to this network called doctorocraphound.com, which is my email address. And then I looked that up in this, like, database of all the Wi-Fi networks that have ever been seen anywhere in the world, and I found his home address. So since I know who doctorocraphound.com is, and I know what street that Wi-Fi router is on, I know that you are hanging out at his house, and I know where his house is, right? So that's like, your phone is just like, it's like it has Ebola, and it's hemorrhaging your personal information all over everybody who's anywhere near you. And the worst of it, I think, comes from the Apple constellation of devices, the iPhone and iPad, but Android's not much better. And maybe actually worse than that is BlackBerry. It's hard to say. BlackBerry is a little harder to get your head around because, like Windows Phone, it just has not the same big user base. So, you know, there's no mobile technology that worth its name that's really private. There's a bunch of people trying to do that stuff. There's a phone that's just come out called Black Phone. It's based in Switzerland. That's more private by design, but there's not a lot of privacy by design in phones. All the social networks are not only not private in the sense that they gather your information for the purposes of showing it to advertisers, but they also gather your information and store it so that they can show it to the police if the police show up. And they often participate in surveillance exercises with governments around the world, but also the major social networks, especially Facebook, their business model depends on you sharing. And so they not only capture all the information that you intentionally share, they try to trick you into sharing more information than you choose to, and they capture information about you that you haven't shared. There's this guy, B.F. Skinner, is this famous psychologist who came up with this idea for a Skinner box, which is a thing to train people. And it's like a Skinner box to train you not to value your privacy or understand when you're giving it up. So, like, the social networks are absolutely the worst for privacy. but the cryptographic tools are the best. So I wrote an article for Locus that you can find if you Google called How to Talk to Your Children About Internet Surveillance. And it's an article about how kids can make themselves more censorship resistant in their internet use and more surveillance resistant. And it lays out a whole bunch of tools that will help you use your favorite networks in ways that are more privacy protecting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next up is young Oscar. Oscar, come on up.
Hi, Oscar.
Hi.
When he said young, I was expecting like a toddler or something. You're not young.
Hang on. I don't have my headphones in.
It's just my favorite adjective used, young man.
Sorry, can't hear you. Still deaf. Hang on. There we go. Go ahead.
Alright. How much privacy is left on the internet?
It's another good question. It really depends. First of all that stuff I said about what is privacy is important. We talked about Ed Snowden at the beginning of this video call, and there's really only a small group of people who are in a position to answer that question, right? Like how much of the technology that we use to protect our privacy works is really another way of asking that question, right? And what Edward Snowden says, and he's really the only person in that group who's actually talking to the public, the rest of them are only talking to each other, what he says is that if you use modern cryptographic tools, Tor, OTR, and Tails, nobody can spy on your conversation without without effectively hacking your computer or hacking the other person's computer or tricking or bribing or convincing the other person you're talking to tell them what's going on. So we do have this amazing and weird situation now where we are able to keep secrets from the most powerful adversaries imaginable by using tools that are free on computers that are so cheap that even some of the poorest people in the world have them, but it's a matter of using them. So again, I'd refer you to that article, How to Talk to Your Children About Mass Internet Surveillance, again, because it really does lay out how those tools work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Daisy. Edwin.
I have privacy settings because we can't really use them.
I can't hear you.
Why have privacy settings if we can't really use them or can't really protect ourselves?
Still can't hear you. You need to talk way louder and a little closer, I think.
Yeah, he said, why do we have privacy settings on so many websites that gives you the illusion of an expectation of privacy if we don't really get to them for that purpose?
Yeah, sure. So there's a really good book that I'll recommend to you that's called How to Cheat at Everything. And it's a book by a guy who's a stage magician who used to be a con artist. And it's not a book really about how to cheat at things. It's a book about how cheating works so that you can tell when you're being cheated. And there's a whole chapter in there on what are called proposition bets, which are this thing that barflies do, people who hang out in bars all the time getting drunk, which is they say, like, I bet you that I can take 10 toothpicks and get them all to stand on each other. I'll bet you $10 that I can do it. And the person on the other side says, well, you can't possibly do that, and they have a bet. It's they're called proposition bets. And proposition bets are one of a con artist's favorite things to do because you can really confound people with the proposition. You can make something that is very hard seem easy and make something that's very easy seem hard, depending on the proposition. And what he says is the way you can tell if a proposition bet is honest or dishonest, whether it's someone who really is saying, like, yeah, I bet you $5 I can crumple up this paper and throw it in the trash can, versus someone who knows a trick to forgetting the thing in the trash can, and he knows he's going to get your money off of you. How you can tell the difference is how complicated the bet is. The more complicated a bet is, the only reason to add complexity to the bet is to make it harder for you to figure out what the deal that you're getting really is. All that complexity is there to make it harder for you to figure out what's going on. And the same is true with privacy settings. All that so-called privacy stuff, when you look at Facebook's privacy dashboard, it looks like it's designed to give you like thousands of meaningful privacy options. When you try to make any sense of it, in fact, when people who are trained privacy and information specialists try to set it up, routinely we discover that it doesn't make any sense at all, and that it's a complete disaster, that no matter what you think you've just done to make sure that that picture of your naked 2-year-old in the bathtub doesn't end up indexed by Google and visible to the whole world, you probably haven't done it right. And that's not because you're stupid, it's because the game is rigged. And so, especially where you use privacy dashboards, I think that's a really good sign that you're being conned. And, you know, the surveillance business model has been the internet's business model for like, you know, sort of between 5 and 10 years. And the surveillance business model is kind of hard because it's creepy. And, you know, the surveillance business model depends on people trusting you while you do something that is manifestly untrustworthy. And that kind of breaks down unless you can trick people into thinking that you are trustworthy. And one of the ways to do that is to make it look like you're the good guy and saying, oh, look, here's your privacy options. Thank you.
Sir. All right, last student question, Daisy. Yep, come a little closer and make sure you speak loudly.
Yeah, sorry, there's something weird with that mic there.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My question was, what can you do to ensure your privacy?
What can we do to
Ensure our privacy?
Ensure our privacy. So there's, again, like, I think the first part of this is what I've harped on all through this, which is to understand that privacy only exists in a context. And like you've probably had the experience of telling a friend something in confidence that was potentially embarrassing and then discovering that that friend told other people. Your privacy failure in that moment is not a technological one, right? There wasn't like a checkbox you could check to say, make my friend more trustworthy, right? It's that privacy breach is like a social one, and that is like, it's not something technology can help us with particularly, although it can make it worse by making it hard to figure out which friends you're actually talking to, which is the Facebook problem. But understanding who you're talking to and understanding that any one of those people could breach your privacy, and that if you tell someone something in confidence, you should expect that unless you know them and they understand the social rules, that it may be that your confidence may be breached. And then in addition to that, making good privacy decisions to start with the default position that unless there's a good reason for something to be shared, you don't. So there's nothing wrong with sharing things that should be shared. Like, it'd be very hard for you to find 10 friends to go to the movie with on Saturday without first asking all your friends about it, possibly in a social group that you all hang out in and on your Twitter feed. But having found 10 friends that you're going to the movies with, if you happen to have, if one of them happens to confide in you about something private, putting that also into the social space where all your friends were is not a good way to do it. Moreover, by making technological choices about how you interact with your friends and what you do with the information you get from them can mean that you don't have accidental technological failures or surveillance and kind of stalking style failures in which your technology is used to betray you or spy on you. So in general, I'd advise against running either of the two mainstream operating systems. I think Linux or Windows and Mac OS are not secure enough for daily use. There's a free and open operating system called Ubuntu, which is a version of the Linux operating system. It's super easy to use and free, and it runs on your Mac or it runs on your PC, and it's much more secure by default, much more secure out of the box. That's a good technology choice. You can also tell it, as with Mac and Windows, you can tell it to encrypt your hard drive when it's set up. That means that if you lose your computer, which like statistically you will lose a computer and or a phone and or several thumb drives in your life, when that's lost, all of the personal information on it isn't ever going to be revealed to anyone else because you've used encryption on it. You can make good choices about your email encryption. That article I mentioned before, How to Talk to Your Kids About Internet Surveillance, talks about how to encrypt your email, how to encrypt your internet sessions, how to browse the internet in a way that's much harder to be spied on, both by your internet service provider and the people they may be snitching on you to, like police or governments, but also by like the company that runs the network you're on. Maybe you're at a coffee shop, they might be spying on you, or people who compromise them, other patrons in the coffee shop who may have compromised it. So I think that's my general set of technological recommendations. And then most importantly, I think, are legal recommendations, which unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of say over, but you know, this is something that we can't ignore, which is that we really need politicians and government to take privacy seriously. You know, one of the most scary things about the NSA leaks from Snowden was the discovery that both the NSA and the British intelligence service GCHQ have been spending $250 million a year to sabotage the security of computers so that they could spy on people with them. Their thought was that they could sabotage, if they broke the security of computers, if they introduced bugs into them, that nobody but them would ever find those bugs and use them to betray the computer's owners. But it seems really unlikely that that's the case. In fact, we know that in some cases those bugs were also discovered by other people. And so when criminals or identity thieves or stalkers discover those bugs that have been introduced by our own governments with our own money, then it puts us all at risk, right? You can't be private no matter how good your choices are if your computer has been hacked and is leaking all your information at the back door. I mean, this is something that we need to get right, and we can't just do it with technological choices. Everything we do today involves the internet, and everything we do tomorrow is going to require the internet. You know, your house is a computer that your body happens to reside in. Increasingly, we have computers inside of our bodies. You know, all of you people who grew up with MP3 players, people my age who grew up with Walkmans and then MP3 players, we've all had enough punishing earbud hours that there's going to come a day when we're going to go deaf, we're going to need hearing aids, and when that day comes, that hearing aid is not going to be like a beige hipster plastic analog transistor radio. It's going to be a computer that's in your body that knows what you hear, that can tell other people what you've heard, that can stop you hearing things, that can make you hear things that aren't even there. And unless that computer is designed with privacy in mind, unless spies aren't redesigning our computers to make sure that they can always be broken into, then we're in like serious trouble. So that's kind of my top line. We need good technology, good choices, and good governance.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Doctorow, Mr. Hilbert, sorry to say, but I got to let these kids go. This class period is ending, and I got to get them to their 4th hour. Thank you so much for spending the morning with us.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cusack. Appreciate it.
Thank you both. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here, possibly, if you still have some time.
Sure.
Okay. You want to ask one? Okay.
Hi, Cory. Thanks for taking some time out today to talk to us. I had a question about, you know, the net neutrality debate has kind of put a spotlight on how internet is regulated and everything like that. And I was wondering if you thought that is internet a human right, and should it be regulated more like a utility versus a commercial product and things like that?
It's a great question. I'm actually going to sit down because my feet are getting tired. So excuse me while I do a little position shift here. Yeah, so is the internet a human right, and how should it be regulated? So it's pretty clear to me that the full exercise of human rights without access to the internet is becoming increasingly fraught, and that there's a future in which it will be impossible to exercise the full suite of human rights without access to the internet. Already, the human rights that we really depend on, that we think of as core, require internet access. Here in the UK, a woman named Martha Lane Fox, who was the champion for digital inclusion and is now the Baroness of Soho, which is one of the weird things that you get when you live in the UK, which is that people have jobs that sound like Dungeons and Dragons. But she commissioned this study by PricewaterhouseCoopers on the impact of the internet on the poorest families in Britain. And what they studied were the effect of the internet on a building, on a housing project where there had been free internet for a couple of years, and compared it to the housing project next door where it hadn't been brought in. So these were like really similar populations, and the internet connected population didn't do anything to get the internet, they just got it. So it's not like they, you know, you were studying people who already knew the internet was good versus people who didn't. They were really kind of as close to an apples-to-apples comparison as you could get. And what PricewaterhouseCoopers found was that on like every metric that you could measure, people who had access to the internet's lives improved. So they had like not just better news, but they had better nutrition, and they had more money in their pocket at the end of the month because they could pay their bills online, and they had better jobs, and their kids got better grades, and they were more socially mobile, and they were healthier, and like every outcome you can name improved for people who had internet access. And so those are, I think, more or less what we think of when we think of human rights. And to say, you know, is the internet a human right when it delivers all of that benefit, when it's a single wire that gives you free speech, a free press, you know, freedom of assembly, access to nutrition and politics and tools and ideas and communities, it seems pretty clear that, like, if it's not a human right, there's not much space between it and a human right, you know, certainly not enough to get more than a couple of sheets of paper between. As to how to regulate it, in terms of regulating the ISPs, I think the most important thing to recognize about telcos is that they're all creatures of public subsidy, that all a phone company really is this huge public subsidy wrapped up in kind of greed and copper. Because there is no way that you can build a phone company or a cable operator through a purely market-based system, right? Like there isn't, if you had to buy on the open market all the sidewalk that you'd have to dig up to lay a wire between, you know, every house and every other house and down to your head offices and then across the country, it would cost you trillions of dollars. You can never operate that at a profit. So what the state does is it makes available to one or two, or not many more than two companies, the right to dig up the roads, the right to go into people's basements, the right to stick poles by the side of the road. And because it's given them that priceless public subsidy, it's not unreasonable to say, well, look, you know, you took the money from the public wants something in return, and what they want in return is not just a phone network, but a good phone network. And a good phone network is a network that connects you to the people that you want to talk to, not the people that are most profitable for you to talk to for the phone company. And so that, to me, just seems like common sense. You know, if Comcast, if AT&T, if Time Warner want to practice network discrimination and use their networks without any government interference, then they should build it without any government subsidy, which is to say the FCC can say, fine, you've got 60 days to get your ugly wires out of our gorgeous dirt, and if you can't, we're going to buy them from you for scrappage costs, and we're going to turn over those wires to someone who will operate a multi-billion-dollar, wildly profitable company in the public interest, and not with its shareholders being the only interest that anyone takes any consideration of.
Thanks, Cory. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
I didn't have a question. I just thought I'd be remiss to not take the opportunity to say hello, and thank you so much for your amazing volume of work. I fell in love with Little Brother and Homeland, although I think For the Win may be my favorite. I don't think it gets enough.
Oh. Well, thank you.
The international scope of it was phenomenal. I mean, I felt like I was right there, you know, all the way across the globe, kind of neck and neck with those kids. It was.
Oh, thank you.
Keep it up.
That's really nice of you. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun to write For the Win. I spent a bunch of time in Mumbai and in Guangzhou writing while I was writing it. And I did tons of reading for it, which was also really exciting, because mostly I read for reviews and for cover quotes, and to just like pick a subject and get the 100 best books about it and just like lie on the couch and read them for a couple of months was super, super amazing. It's not a thing you get to do very often as an adult.
Very cool.
It was like a real, you know, I know it's a young adult novel, but it was a real young adult experience to just nerd out on a subject and just like get a huge stack of books and just completely go to town on it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing
Thank you very much. Thanks. I really appreciate your very kind remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, that was my favorite book of yours as well, The Young.
Aw, thanks.
And it had a lot of labor history in it. Did you
It did.
Did you study that in school or anything, or is that just something you picked up while you were researching?
Oh no, my parents are Reds. my dad's my dad and my mom are both Trotskyists. So no, I grew up with tons of labor history. I was what they call a red diaper baby, and grew up with all kinds of political stuff in my life. I knew the Joe Hill song before I was like 6. So yeah.
Okay. You kind of answered this one previously.
Mm-hmm.
It was when you talked about, but I've heard you talk about how libraries and schools should teach young people to, be more savvy on the internet and defend their privacy. Are there other than that article, are there other resources you could talk about or mention that?
Yeah. I wrote a piece for Information Week on a proposal for a curriculum for for making young people better with computers. And so I think one of the biggest challenges to making young people good at privacy on the internet is that it's actually against the school and library rules by and large for them to do things to their privacy. Thanks to the Communications Decency Act, if you've got federal funding, be blocked and what shouldn't be blocked. But it also, in order to figure out whether or not you're looking at a web page that you should or should not be looking at, it has to spy on all the web pages that you go to. And so these third parties end up with huge dossiers of what your patrons or what your students are looking at. Sometimes that's also visible to the IT department of the library system or to the school. And so this is like a really enormous breach of your privacy. And if you care about privacy, the first thing that you do is start using a proxy so that information could not be gleaned from your usage, from your sessions. But of course, if kids do that, they get kicked off the network and get punished and maybe even get kicked out of school. I think that if we were really serious about this stuff, we would try to figure out a way to help kids understand this mortal conundrum, because kids get that what you do matters a lot more than what you say. If you tell a kid not to smoke while you're lighting a cigarette off one that you're about to stub out in the ashtray, they know that you're not serious. And if you tell a kid that their privacy is really important and precious and can never be gotten back once they've given it up, and so they should never give it up unless you're spying on them, in which case their privacy is worthless, and if they do anything to protect themselves, you'll punish them, they know that you're not really serious about privacy. But obviously teachers and librarians can't change the law, so my curriculum proposal was to get kids to document not how to break the network, and not to break the network itself, which puts kids in jeopardy, but rather to document what their teachers and fellow students are doing in the face of this kind of network censorship and surveillance. So, for example, you could do ethnographies of your fellow students, documenting when and how the censorware gets in the way of their learning. There was a great study that the Electronic Frontier Foundation did about 2004, where they took the top 100 keywords for all of the major subjects in the Common Curriculum and looked at the top search results for all of those keywords and checked how many of them were censored in schools. And what they found was between a quarter and for reproductive health, up to 75% of websites that were considered the most relevant websites for the key concepts in the Common Curriculum were not visible in schools. You couldn't be accessed over school networks. So document how this gets in the way of learning, and also the way that it gets in the way of teaching, because I often speak to teachers who describe their incredible frustration with setting up a learning unit in the morning, and then over lunch it gets added to the block list, and when the kids sit down again after lunch, they can't access that website anymore, and it's like, sorry kids, I guess it's worksheets again today. So document how this is getting in the way of your teachers. Then learn how to use Freedom of Information Act requests to find out who the vendor is, how much the school board pays for it, what oversight there is, who else gets access to your private information, and what they do with it, and then present that all to the school board, along with a report on the corporate ethics of the company that's providing the censorware, because those companies are all dirty as hell and provide censorware and surveillance tools to the United Arab Emirates and the government of Syria and Muammar Gaddafi and any number of unsavory people. And so you can kind of roll up a project by students that teaches them about privacy literacy and privacy advocacy without getting them into the kind of trouble that they would get in otherwise. They can, if they're going to include the fact that it's technologically not very robust and easy to defeat, the way that they should include that is by asking other students to anonymously report their techniques for breaking censorware, so that they can include that in their report. Look, we have lots of students who get around the censorware that you're spending all this money on, that incorrectly blocks all this material that is provided by these war criminals. How useless is this? What are you going to do about it?
Okay, just one more question. Do you have
Sure.
time? I just thought it'd be good if you just finished with, why is subversion important in democracy?
Sure. I guess what you always need, because okay, so let me think about this. So a system can't be judged by how it works, but by what happens when it fails, right? The best car in the world, doesn't matter how great its acceleration is, how great its gas mileage is, if it doesn't have any brakes, or if it explodes when it's rear-ended at low speed, right? The failure mode is actually way more important than the success mode. And the failure mode of democracy is that people who claim to be representing democratic fundamentals turn out to be representing their own interests, or the interests of a small group of people to whom they're beholden or captured, or feel some loyalty at the expense of a wider polity. And what subversion does is provides a space for challenging the establishment. And there are good establishments. There are technocratic elements of the governing class who really do want to look at the evidence for what makes us happiest and best off and most prosperous and healthiest, and try to create policy initiatives that get that to happen. But there's also lots of entities who are captured by industry, who are captured by political points of view that are intolerant or anti-pluralistic, and it's really important that we are able to speak out against it, and that the fact that you are in the establishment shouldn't insulate you from the kind of cut and thrust of political debate, from that subversion that comes from saying, I think that the great and the good are actually the terrible and the awful. Before we had science, the closest approximation we had to it was alchemy, which was like science, except that you never told people what you learned, so you were able to kid yourself. You never had to defend what you thought you knew against someone who thought that you were full of it. And as a result, every alchemist discovered for himself in the hardest way possible that drinking mercury was a really bad idea. And when we started publishing, and more importantly, debating, and allowing for the subversion of the received wisdom, we were able to shift the way that research was conducted, that furtherance of the human condition was conducted, so that it was much harder to kid yourself or to let wishful thinking trump evidence. And unless we can reflect that same dialectic, that same ethos of peer review and discourse in the wider world, I think that there's no way that we can really know that we're getting the government that we deserve, that we're getting evidence-based, good government.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's been so good, and I'll let you know where the link is online, and maybe I'll try to send you a present or something for this.
You don't need to do that. It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming, and thanks to your patrons and the students who came earlier and so on. It's really a pleasure to do these things. I just wish I had time to do more of them.
Yeah. Well, the thing with the students was fantastic. So, all right. Well, great talking to you. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.